My first thought when you say that is culture flows from the leader. So many cases I've seen for better and worse, sometimes for good and sometimes not for good, that the way the leader behaves is a role model for their team.
Welcome to What Works, where nonprofit leaders share real stories about what makes impact possible and the decisions we make to reduce the internal cost of leadership while building healthy teams. Because success has patterns, and sometimes the best kept secrets aren't found in the boardroom but on the field. I'm your host, Marla Moody. I'm a transformational leadership coach and author. After serving decades in the nonprofit sector, I'm really passionate about helping leaders stay resilient, clear in their message, and effective. Because when leaders are at their best, the whole team thrives. And today we're going to really look at culture and how sometimes the problem isn't the team, it's actually the culture. My guest today is Alex Montgomery. She's the managing director of Team VKA, which is a nonprofit consulting firm with over 20 years of experience, some legal advocacy and leading operations, fundraising, organizational transition. She has a heart for people and she also has a heart for operations, which is close to my heart. So, Alex, we're excited to have you. Please come and tell us what works.
Great. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm so happy to have this conversation here at Team VKA, where I work with my colleagues, Velia Soto and Kevin Hooper. We're so interested in how teams can thrive and really not just about the nuts and bolts, but about how people feel about it. And if they feel good about it, just all the good things and productivity and values-driven work flows from there.
How did you even find your way to Team VK?
Good question. I always say if you looked at my resume or you looked at my LinkedIn, you would be like, either this lady is crazy or maybe she's onto something. So I always say, if I can tell you the story, it would make sense. So I did start as a lawyer, save the world. I was really inspired by the civil rights movement and how the law really pushed that along. Today, I feel like very proud of my colleagues in the legal profession because that's really where, you could sort of force bad actors to stop their bad acting. What I discovered, however, is that I'm a lover, not a fighter. So litigation was not for me, but that's really where the work happened. So I ended up moving into nonprofit. But the what I took from my legal work and my legal training was really what we call issue spotting, which is like, what is the true thing we're talking about? Where really is the lever to make change or the issue? So as I've worked in nonprofits, I find myself often looking at there's so much work to do. There's so many emergencies. There are so many problems. There are so many fires that you really have to figure out, what your priority is, what's important. So that's sort of one piece that has been a thread for me as I've made my way through fundraising and operations in a charter school and working in a social service agency and then doing this consulting where a lot of it meets together. And then that other piece of how do you sustain your work with so much pressure? And that's really where the culture piece comes in.
Alex, speaking my language. What is it about operations that gives you the passion as well? Because I want to talk on both.
Yeah, so I fell into operations when I worked in a charter school and I didn't even know what it was. I was like meeting with people like, what is my job? And so there's like the big O, small O, but I have discovered that it's everywhere, right? It's processes. It's like being organized. I love a calendar. It's how you structure everything. And it can apply, of course, if you do the finance and the HR and whatever, but it can also apply to how you manage your team culture. It can apply to your regular habits. And so that's how I approach operations, not so much as, oh, I've got a background in finance and IT, or it's more like, what are our processes and does everyone understand their roles? And are we really, all rowing in the same direction towards a common goal? That is how I see operations. So for me, it's like the matrix, like I see it everywhere. I feel like everything's operations.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I really see, Operations isn't sexy. It's hard to make a lot of times to raise money for in a nonprofit because people want kind of the sexy thing of what's going on over here. But if you don't have good structure, good communication processes, being able to pay people, the legal, then really you're harming the people in your organization. And so how do you give vision around the pieces that don't seem exciting to maybe leaders or donors?
Well, I used to say when we worked in the school, I'm like, do you want us to not have toilet paper or turn the lights on? I mean, some of this is just elemental. Like, you can't run an organization without paying for that and having that structured, number one. But also that it's everywhere, and maybe you have to change what you call it, but really about how do you get children from A to B. Like, you've got to have staff there. They've got to know what their roles are. You've got to keep it clean and safe. So maybe you don't call it operations, but really underpinning that is a process. And again, for me, operations is also clarity in people's roles. Do they really understand what is their job and what is not their job? That can be huge for culture also, where yeah, we all do it. I'm like, but that's great. Yay, teamwork. But you can't have sort of everybody in charge, but sort of nobody in charge. That to me is another piece of operation. So for funders, it's like, you want this to be impactful. Here are pieces to make it impactful and that are necessary. Some funders get that and some funders don't. But you don't necessarily go in there and say, please fund my operations. You just talk about it in terms of how it is part of the broader um, goal for more impact.
Yeah. So what you're talking about too, it really is you're stepping back and you're looking at the big and saying what are the core elements. Oh, I'd love to ask you if a leader, and this is kind of shifting to team and culture, if a leader says, my team's the problem, what is the first question that you would ask them?
So my first thought, not question, but my first thought when you say that is culture flows from the leader. That so many cases I've seen, for better and worse, sometimes for good and sometimes not for good, that the way the leader behaves is a role model for their team. So if a leader behaves as, I'm what's important, and I tell you what to do, and maybe isn't collaborative, then you have a team that's maybe not super engaged and that only does precisely what they're asked and doesn't ever want to sort of engage and go further. That's how the culture of the team is, that leads from the top. Whereas if you've got a sort of a team structure where it's, we work together, I bring you all the information I have. That's how I like to operate as a team lead. And then I truly value and respect what you bring. You probably are closer to the work than I am. So let's all work together on this. And then you find creative ideas bubbling up and things moving forward, and you don't need to micromanage. So I guess my first question for a leader would be, why isn't your team functioning? Like, what do you see specifically? Because if it is, I have to micromanage them, it could be, are they clear on what's their job and not their job? Or have you created an environment where they feel like, I'm not going to do anything until I'm very clear you want me to do it? Those are a couple of things that could be happening, but really, what does the leader think is the problem? Because it can't just be, they just don't do things the way I would. I mean, that's not how you can lead a team.
So, how would you define culture just to make sure that we're all on the same page?
Yeah, good question. I was having a conversation with a colleague the other day, and he said, man, I don't think I've worked anywhere with a good culture for 20 years. And I thought, oh no. Oh no, I've worked in so many places with great culture that when I'm in a place that doesn't feel right, I'm like, there's something here that could be fixed, because I know what good culture feels like.
Yeah.
So for me, people feel clear and engaged in their work. They really enjoy it. It's not about politics or jockeying or checking off boxes or making the boss happy. It's about they own it and they feel value in the work they're doing and what they're aiming towards. And that while there's hierarchy, because you need some level of understanding where the buck stops, the work isn't built on hierarchy. It's not built on whatever your title is and that makes you important, or, it's built on the work. Again, working in nonprofit, I really believe that the issues that you're fighting against should all be external. There's plenty of them. So when you have to fight them internally, it makes it really hard to make progress on the really difficult societal problems. So internally should be a safe, positive, productive place. And also that has boundaries, because this is work that's never going to stop. We are likely not going to solve these problems, but we're going to do our best. And then we need to go home and have dinner with our families. Otherwise, we'll just burn out, and that won't help anybody.
I highly, highly agree with that. And sometimes I hear the word guilt associated with not stopping, the pressure. Could you speak into that feeling of guilt? Because the work never stops and there's always more to do. How would you speak into someone who says, I need to get it done. Think about all the people that won't get served if I don't do this or whatever.
Well, my first thought is, uh, what gender is mostly working in nonprofits? Women, perhaps? So how do women feel when they are not caring for people for a few minutes? That is something that's also deeply interesting to me as also a single mother by choice. There's a lot on our plates. And people will say, take a time for yourself, self-care, but really it is operational. It is about boundaries and when your work begins and ends, and knowing that if you want to continue this work and really keep going, what you should work on is your boundaries. And I don't want to put it on, overworked women, but there is something about my workday ends at 5 and I'm letting it end at 5 and it will be there at 9. And what's a true emergency? Because you're right, there is so much need out there, but pushing yourself to the brink and then getting to the point where, you're burnt out and you have to stop altogether, that doesn't help either. So keeping yourself filled up and making sure that you find those boundaries for yourself, as simple as I'm not checking my emails after 5 or before 9. Emergencies have to be true emergencies. It's okay not to have back-to-back meetings for 8 straight hours. Those kinds of things can make such a difference in order to really truly serve people. That can help the community more than you burning yourself out.
And above that, which we could talk about that all day long, you're not as effective even before burnout. You cannot do concentrated work for so long. We think we can. We pride ourselves in it, but a 4-hour solid meeting is not going to be as effective as taking those breaks and giving some space and letting our brain relax. So not only long-term burnout, but short-term effectiveness is based on that too.
For sure. And I've been working on a project on meetings, and what are the meetings for? What kind of meetings are they? Is this a brainstorm meeting? Is this a check-in meeting? So some of those long meetings are because we don't really know what we're trying to get out of them. And we're just like, yeah, we got to work hard. So here's a meeting. So that's another sort of operational piece that can really lead into culture. If you're really targeted, it doesn't have to be 4 hours. And then you could take a break and your brain could activate and find some creative solutions for sure.
Absolutely. And on that, of course, is it's hard for our minds to pivot from like strategy to problem solving and to not allow those in the same space, but to give segments the effectiveness is just far beyond what we think.
For sure.
When you think through boundaries, what I've heard you say both specifically and distantly is there's a value system, like a boundary of I'm going home at 5 is a value of saying I'm not going to diss my family for that final email. When I think of culture, I think of its values plus action builds culture. I'd love for you to just talk through the idea of values and the importance of that from a team perspective, from a boundaries perspective. Just kind of open it up a little bit.
Yeah, I think what we say and then what we do, right? Actions are greater than words. So you say, oh, we value work life balance, and then you're getting pings at 9 o'clock at night. I value work life balance, but you've never seen me as your boss take a PTO, or rarely. Those are the kinds of things that you say it, and then you need to show, like, you have to philosophically truly believe it. So those boundaries, like, if your boss stops pinging you after 5, and then sometimes I've done this with my team, admonishing them like, hey, get out of here. This is not this can wait. Those things really add up, right? So my value is truly, yes, let's work together, let's work hard, let's be collaborative, and then let's go home, and I'll see you tomorrow. And I mean it. And if I, for some reason, have a message that I want to send at an off hour, I schedule it for 9 o'clock. Even if it's like 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, I'm like, you don't even have to think about this till Monday. So I try to really show that. And over time, then my teams go, oh, yeah, she really means it. She really does not reach out to me after 5. I really can be off after 5. And I will not message you outside of work hours unless it's emergency. So I keep going back to the work hours thing because I feel like in this remote world, it's just gone haywire and people say it and then they act differently. So I think if you truly believe that value, you need to live it. Another example might be keeping your team in the loop, right? Which I believe strongly in. And I've had some examples of this where if your team may not be directly related to organizational work, but if they don't know what's happening, that makes them feel like they aren't trusted, like they aren't respected or important. Like, oh, I didn't know that this new initiative was going to be launched. Oh, I didn't know that that person was leaving and this person was coming. And I found out at the last minute. That kind of thing makes teams feel like, oh, I see how far down on the totem pole I am. So for me, it's regular meetings and it's telling my team as much as I can about what's happening, because over time they feel like, oh, I'm in the loop. I'm not going to be caught off guard by something that happens. I'm not so low on the totem pole that I don't get to know this. So that's another piece that, like, philosophically to me is important, and then try to really be consistent about taking action on it.
Yeah, you gave some good examples of that. Having your team in the loop, and also sometimes they can't know everything, right? There's a dance there. What are some practical ways of knowing the pattern of it, and then when there's some things that you have to withhold because of, it's sensitive.
Sure. I think if you have a regular practice of sharing as much as you can, the withholding is less of an issue, right? Because
Good
they
point.
trust you and they're like, you've always shown us that you are going to keep us in the loop. But you also, it's also your job as a leader to keep things confidential, but also to protect your team. That's another piece of it. And I think when you really build that up, your team understands when there are things you can't share. Another sort of philosophy of mine, sort of the servant leadership, is when things go right, team gets the credit. When things go wrong, it's on me as the leader to fix it. I'm not blaming team members for things that went wrong, and I'm not taking credit for work the team has done. Those things in combination mean when you get to a point where you can't be open about something, then they trust you and it's okay. And they're like, we know that you have our best interests at heart. So it's not so difficult.
Yeah. I love that because you're building trust over time, and your consistency of keeping people in the loop is building that trust and knowing that you're not one to just hold your cards too close to you.
And you asked operationally. I'm a big believer in the weekly team meeting. Maybe it doesn't have to be weekly, but can't hurt even if it's quick. Um, i i- it's so easy, but it's also easy to think that you're too busy for it. And it's one of
Yes.
those things that if you don't respect that time, your team feels that. You just keep moving it around. You keep, you don't have time to be a part of this team meeting, and they feel that. But if you are consistent about it and you do that sort of sharing of information and giving of credit, then you really get a team that's just ready to activate and ready to sort of row in the same direction. And it's fun. Then you trust each other and you do the work and you're like, so many societal problems, but we're going to fix them, but also I'm going to go home at 5, and then you can really keep going. I mean, and then reduce turnover and, get into a groove and watch people grow professionally. So many good things can come from that.
I've also seen where people overmeet, right? And so how do you make those meetings effective rather than just feeling like a waste of time? What are some of those secrets?
One is know what you're meeting about, because I've been places where like this is a brainstorm slash update slash we got to make some decisions, and also who needs to be here, and the next thing you know, either everybody's there and it's just a herd of cats, or it's just like a long ranging conversation and you don't know what does success look like? So one, decide what it is. If it's a brainstorm, it can be wide ranging. Like we sort of have this problem and we're not really sure where we're going, so we're just gonna whiteboard it and talk. Fine. Or just an update. And does that even need to be a meeting? Maybe yes, maybe no. That could be like 10 minutes of your, weekly check-in, just so that everybody knows what everyone's working on. Do you need a decision to be made? Is everyone in the meeting who needs to be to make that decision? And as simple as like, what does success look like for this meeting? Which sounds crazy, but you want to end with, we made the decision or we know what we need to do next. And at the end of the meeting, you say that. This is what we're doing next. You're doing this. You're doing this. I mean, it's literally so easy. It's hard.
The importance of having the right people in the meeting, not having people that are like, this doesn't have anything to do with me, or not bringing in the people that actually know what they're doing, right? Or is, what is your kind of thumbnail approach of how do you know if have the right people in the meeting or not?
So, yeah, this is a big operations piece too, right? Because operations is always a Venn diagram overlapping of so many different people. Like, oh, HR has to make that decision and, programs have to make that decision and this goes up to leadership. So again, where are you in the process? Like, what kind of meeting is this? I like, especially when you've got really busy leaders and it's hard to get their attention, I like to bring to them we think you should do this, yes or no. Not here's the problem, maybe we could sort of do this, I'm not sure, what do you think? But bring to them, here's what we plan to do.
Yes.
Thumbs up or thumbs down. So your meeting may not need the higher ups until you're there. And when you're there and you're like, all right, I got something solid and I want you to thumbs up or thumbs down this, you sort of figure out who you need to get to that point. So I often find preliminary meetings with the team and really building up to whatever issue it is that you are seeking a problem for, and then bringing in the final, I like to call it the final person who's going to bless it, when you've got something solid. But don't bring them into those earlier meetings, because then you can't ever find time on the calendar. They're like, you're not ready for me. So, subject matter experts, people with the smart brains who are going to have a creative approach, love to bring in some like, you're interested in this topic, whatever cross collaboration, I think is a great way to also build teamwork.
That's a really good idea because you might bring in someone that on the org chart doesn't fit into that meeting, but because of their approach to life, yeah. So that's I think a really good tip to circle. And I love also that leaders don't like to be brought problems. I guarantee you, most leaders know the problems, but leaders do want solutions, and there's sometimes a fear of, I can't have this meeting if the leader doesn't condone it or, like start it or whatever. But what I'm hearing you say is Let's get the right people in the room to talk about it and then bring the leaders in. That's
Yeah.
such a healthy pattern. How does that build healthy culture?
Yeah, so that to me is very natural, but I know that for some people isn't. And so the idea that leaders have all the answers, I've been one of those leaders. I have been for many years, and I'm like, please help me. So the idea that the leader sort of already knows everything and we should just listen to what they have, just wait for them to have the solutions. It's not everybody rowing in the same direction. It's people sort of sitting, waiting, row a little bit, waiting for the next one, row a little bit. But like if you're really truly bringing together all the brains that you have in your organization to solve problems, it should be natural that all levels say, hey, this is a problem. I'm going to try to solve it. I also believe, particularly I've worked in social service nonprofits where direct service staff, they're right there. I'm a strong believer in you see this day in and day out. You probably know what the problems are. And way up at whatever level, they have a different vantage point. And if you can bring those together, then we might be getting somewhere. But I always think let's start with the people closest to the work who say, here's your problem. Here's your operational problem, for example. You've got clients coming in and they're confused about XYZ. We don't have, our people who speak the right language. They have this problem, but we don't have a program for it. But you have to engage them in problem solving initially, because if they feel like this is my job, problem solving is not my job, I'm just going to keep going the best I can. But if you have a healthy relationship with your team, you can bring that up the ladder and say, listen, we've identified this problem. We were going to put together a team to see what solutions we can come up with. And you have got to have enough leadership in there from other places to say, we can afford to do this. We can't afford to do this. They'll say, oh, we need more staff. So we need to say, well, who do you need and where's the gap? But really fleshing that out with the team shows them also what leadership has to think about. Leadership has to think about budget. They have to think about who they can hire. They have to think about if they can afford that staff member. And that also engenders so much trust with staff who are brought into that decision making. They're like, oh, you value my opinion. Also, you're telling me about the other ways that this organization works. And you can also find great people who maybe will be promoted up to leadership, which is, to me, the goal and the ideal is if people want to move up the ladder, you have to give them opportunities to collaborate and shine. And then all sorts of great things happen. People get promoted, they stay at organizations, get more creative, problems get solved. And it in all ways reflects well on leaders if problems are solved. So why would you want to contain that to a smaller group of people?
From your perspective, why do they? Because you see that all the time where they don't invite the people who actually might know the day to day. What do you think is some of the rub that keeps leaders from doing that?
Well, to keep, assume best intent, and that it's not something perhaps related to ego. I do think that our busyness culture, a culture of like, we're just too busy to take those steps, that's what's holding us back, right? This idea of, meetings, and I'm just too busy to engage on this level with creative problem solving or to think about it, right? Like the whole idea of, it's just easier to do myself than to train someone else. But if you prioritize it, like, no, if we want everyone rowing, we're going to have to stop and take a minute and sort of rejigger how we are bringing people together and really take a minute and think, who's closest to this problem? Who do we know who's, really a team player and has some great, could have some great ideas or could really do well in, a sort of a cross collaborative group, and then make that happen, make that a priority. Think we're sort of, the fundraising and the leadership meetings and this is just sort of how I go about my day. And I've packed myself with 8 hours of meetings and then I'm exhausted. Have those creative ideas. Like we're saying that the time for your brain to rest. Really need to intentionally shift your habit to give space for that. And also that it's not necessarily, it often is not more work for the leaders at the top. The whole point is you're bringing more people to help you row, but you do have to set that tone and sort of designate whoever's going to operationally make it happen. You got to get a meeting on the calendar. You got to get the people in the meeting. There are some process steps to it, but you do need to sort of have a minute to breathe and say, okay, let's make this happen. Like, I believe in this, new way of looking for problems, looking for solutions to problems.
So it really is shifting for many leaders, it's gonna shift their philosophy and their habits of what they've done in the past, and, which might be a big shift, um, to do it. Have you seen ways that has helped that catalyst for leaders to kinda pivot from doing it all and not including people to being this more inclusive way of coming up with a solution?
Well, yes. I mean, there's sort of two pieces there. There's the philosophy, right, as you say, and the operations. And you can sort of come at it either way. I think it's harder to have one philosophy and then for a leader to wake up in one day and say, you know what, I'm going to have a different philosophy. Like, my philosophy was I solve all the problems, but today I'm going to bring other people in. So they may need some proof points. I think operationally, and it does to some extent come back to meetings, but it also comes back to usually what happens is there is an issue that requires cross collaboration, right? Like, often you've got a budget crisis paired with the way programs operate, paired with, back office operations, and they need to work together to change things, right? They need to work together to make programs more efficient or maybe serve more clients, because if they do, they'll get more funding, and that's what they need to do, but they need to do it with the same amount of staff. So they really need to work together to figure out how they're going to be efficient. So how are they going to do that if they have no cadence for working together and they have no shared goal? They just each have their own silo goal. So, a lot of this comes back to meetings, both having a regular space to come together and being very clear on what you're trying to accomplish in that space. So whether it's weekly meetings, and sometimes I've found, especially in these very complex situations, you can't come in with one, this is the goal where we'll be in 12 months. It's, here's what we're going to try to achieve this month. Here's the one immediate problem, and let's meet week after week to sort of to work through this problem and figure out how we work together and figure out who from each category. Okay, finance, I need this help from you. Okay, facility operations, I need this help from you. Okay, programs, how does it work and how could we do things differently? And bringing people to the table that way. And when you start getting that cadence and you get those creative ideas, I find that leaders can watch that happen and go, oh, how interesting. How interesting that you came together and thought about that piece. I find, leaders, especially at the highest level, are not spending a lot of time on operations. They're spending time on very high level strategy and fundraising, as they should. So the operations, really watching that flourish, can help with like, oh, why am I worrying about all this? These guys are really smart. Let's have them do it. And then that
Yeah,
can multiply.
yeah, that, and like you said, it doesn't help just the organization, it helps the leader too. Well, how
Yeah,
would you
then
count?
they don't feel so alone, hopefully.
Yeah. No, no, no. How would you counsel someone who doesn't have a leadership position and sees this, gets it, and wants to be part of the solution? What would your counsel for them be?
I do think that if you have like a healthy, positive culture, or at a minimum, a healthy, positive relationship with your supervisor, bring them your ideas, right? Like, a really good supervisor wants to hear where things could be better or fixed, wants to hear about your ideas, will activate you to move forward on them. I certainly try to make a space for I've always tried to make a space for my team, that if they have got a new good idea to change or fix something, I want to hear about it and I want to give them the ownership to enable that. So, showing that you're doing that problem solving and thinking and trying to help leaders, it's great managing up, and it's the kind of thing that can bring you visibility, especially in a healthy organization.
Wonderful. And so I don't hear give up, but do these things. So leaders really do want solutions. They just sometimes feel afraid that the solution has to come from them. So I love it that, empowering those. If
I also think working at a nonprofit, as opposed to where the solution comes from, it's trying to make a difference. And like,
yes.
we need all hands on deck, all
Yeah.
hands. So that piece, I think, is critical. If your true goal is the mission of your organization, all hands on deck.
Yeah. And we were all put there to be fully engaged. So, kind of one last question. I know we're getting towards the end of our time, but if a leader listening to this today realizes that their culture might be the issue, what would you suggest? Where should they start?
I do think sort of an audit of if they think culture is the issue. In what way? Are people not speaking up? Are people disengaged? Really not feeling like their work is truly respected and valued. Like, how is it showing up? Because that symptom can tell you, like, are people not connected to each other? Are they not clear on their work and what they own and what value they're bringing to the organization? Are there broader issues? I mean, there's certainly broader issues happening in our society that at many nonprofits can bring staff down. Like really thinking about what I like to call meeting the moment. That's another piece. So one question would be sort of an audit of what they feel is not working in their culture. And then also an internal audit. It can be, help if you've got an executive coach or, there's a lot of great resources for what is your philosophy about how people should show up at work. Because some people can think a culture is broken because they're not answering their emails at 10 o'clock at night. I'm not sure that means the culture's broken. It may be that it's in conflict with your philosophy. So what do you think as a leader culture ought to look like? And step one is model that. Of
Hmm.
course, my definition of a healthy culture is not working 24/7 and is not, taking all the credit and is not including people. So that's your philosophy. I would disagree. But, assuming it's not really looking at yourself. Am I living out my philosophy of what a good culture is?
And I think that's brilliant. I think one thing I would add is where do you feel fear? Like where do you feel discomfort in that? Because so often high achieving leaders are high achieving because they have to be, So yeah, the I had another question, but and I lost it because I gave that comment instead.
Well, I will just add to that the anxiety of being an executive director, particularly in this moment, and the fear of everything that's happening and doing your best and what's happening with funding is very real. So I also don't want to say that there isn't a reason why leaders might feel fear and then have that trickle down unintentionally into the culture, right? Because it is a very, very difficult time right now. So I'm speaking from sort of all things being equal, but that's certainly not the case for so many nonprofits right now.
Well put. With the cost of like an external, like an executive coach or, some like stuff that I do, which is somewhat to do with emotional regulation, resilience, conflict resolution, the cost of hiring someone versus the cost of living in that stress, what would you speak to that? How would you speak to that?
Yeah, I think it's similar to the boundaries and the burnout, right? Which is, you can keep pushing and pushing, but are you going to end up burning out? Um, which helps no one and actually reduces your efficacy. So we do have this scarcity mindset that is so difficult in nonprofits because there is some truth to it, right? Like there isn't enough. It's not enough money. There's not enough time. There's so many problems. This is just true. And so in order to keep your longevity, I can see, coaching can be something that can help you, to your point, regulate and keep moving the work forward, and can lead to positive things, right? Because moving the work forward and really being creative is part of also fundraising, right? Like keeping it fresh and making sure that you're really always striving towards solving problems and being able to pitch that to funders. So I could see, coaching much like making sure you're not spending every minute working, but spending some time like sort of deeply reflecting can have so many positive effects, because the potential for burnout is real, right? And
Yeah,
just saying, I can't keep going.
it's so true. A quote I heard the other day on LinkedIn, I feel like would fit your philosophy is, who knows, maybe you're the one that wrote it, but your company, you're 100% replaceable in your company or 100% irreplaceable at home. And I think there's some of that of bending, but also to be as valuable to your company and to the cause is really stepping back and saying, I'm not going to do it all because that's not healthy and it's not the culture I want to bring.
Well, and you might think, oh, I don't want my staff to do that, but they're watching you. So, I always think it's a lot like parenting. You can say whatever you want, but whatever you do is what they're going to do. So the same thing happens. If you're working all the time, you can tell them, oh, no, you shouldn't. But they're like, but you are. So, putting that mask on yourself before putting it on.
So true. I did want to ask, how is it being a single parent, especially of choice, and still working full time and leading and uh, what's that like for you?
Well, it's handy that I love operations because being organized is really the only way to do it. Being organized and ruthlessly prioritizing. The pandemic was a terrible time, but also remote work. I don't know how I would have done it. I was doing some of that before the pandemic, but being able to sort of allows you to be at two places at once. But for me, a lot of the philosophies are the same, right? Especially because she's now a teenager. Yikes. So, let's bring you into the decision making and let's trust you. And, it's hard, but also let's have processes and routines and ways we do things so that, it can be easier for both of us because, getting her out the door and then starting my work day with my brain sort of in the right place requires some consistency and rhythm and routine. So we have definitely developed that. It's not to say it hasn't been hairy a time or two, but that is really sort of interestingly like a parallel, like the way I want to operate with my teams, but also with my child. Like I want to trust her and I want her to be independent and I want her to participate in running the house. Just last night, she put the dishes away, started the laundry. I mean, I know. It was awesome. Like for 13, that's pretty awesome.
And what I like is that you are building trust, that you're building, like, there is something about processes and stuff that brings security. And the fact that you can use those philosophies in both places really is wise. So thank you for giving us a little insight onto that piece of your life too.
Yeah, I always like President Obama. He said he had two suits, right? He had gray and blue. One less decision. He's like, I need to reduce the number of decisions. So I find myself often being like, how can I reduce the number of decisions I make in a day? That is critical because then you can really save your brain power for the tough ones, not like, what am I going to wear? Or like, where's my backpack? We We need to keep
Absolutely.
things running without those little decisions.
And that's too with, reducing clutter, whether it's, phone clutter or visual clutter or whatever,
Or
just
meeting
that
clutter.
reduce meeting clutter,
Meeting clutter.
definitely. Well, Alex, I could talk to you all day long, but I really appreciate giving us some of your time, your wisdom, your patience as we tried to get this actually scheduled. So thank you so much. Is there anything you want to end with?
Thanks. It was so great to talk to you, and always happy to chat about how people can be happy at work even though the problems are hard.
True that. Well, thanks for listening to What Works with Marla Moody. Until next time, stay clear, lead well, and discover what works.